Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Outsmart Yourself series. My name is Riikka Söderlund. I'm the VP of Marketing and Communication here at Smartly. And joining us today is Caroline Schlunsen, Channel Lead for App Marketing at the amazing and extremely addictive e-com About You. In today's episode, we'll be exploring a little bit about how the privacy regulation in the marketing space over the past year has impacted marketers and social advertising in particular. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Caroline, it's been a year since we last spoke, and it was right before iOS 14 was introduced. And the requirement to allow users to opt in for tracking has, of course, impacted all of us since then. What has the impact been for About You?
First of all, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's really been a year. It's incredible to think about that and how much has happened in the past year. Obviously, we've seen an impact, quite a big one, obviously. In some ways, it has not been as sort of bad as we imagined. In other ways, we saw effects that we didn't really predict to happen in that way. So, I mean, one thing that definitely did happen is that user acquisition on iOS obviously has become a lot harder than before, just from the aspect of less behavioral data. We have to rely on SKAd network. We basically can only really securely measure the CPI. We have some ways of seeing some in-app activity post-install, but as we all know, it's very limited on SKAd network. So what we had to do is we had to move away from our former steering mechanisms more towards kind of going back in time more towards a CPI optimized steering, which was very different. We did run some analysis before we actually did the switch to kind of see like, okay, what app value do we actually have? What CPIs can we actually steer for in the different countries and also on OS basis. So we did that, but at the same time, yeah, it's very difficult to really steer towards high value users much more so than before. So that was one thing. So far it's been happening. It's been working quite well, actually. We were actually able to scale our iOS campaigns in the past year. So that was something that we didn't really see coming. So from that point of view, it was a good development, but obviously it's a different kind of steering that we do, and we have to reassure ourselves quite a lot more looking at overall data on the app. How does the iOS user base in general behave, because we can't attribute it to the campaigns anymore, and then try to see if we find some sort of connection to actually our campaigns having scaled more in the past year. On the other hand, what also happened is obviously retargeting was heavily impacted. So audience is shrinking there. What we at the same time did see quite heavily is though an audience shift towards new customer campaigns. And I'm not necessarily saying app install campaigns, but I mean About You is multi-platform. So we also run campaigns, new customer campaigns just for the web. So we saw a heavy shift of an audience into those. So overall, we didn't really lose the retargeting audience, but what's really happened for us is that it's been a lot harder to target new customers specifically outside of app install campaigns. And since, I mean, we're still growing and our focus is very much on growth still, and thus very much on new customers, that is a recent challenge that we're facing.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing that you've actually been able to scale even during this. Must have been one of the most challenging environments, at least during my career, for any marketer. You said that you were prepared for a lot of things, but some things surprised you. What would you say was the biggest surprise that you've had over the past year?
The fact that we were actually able to scale the campaigns, that it went like the SKAd network went more smoothly overall than we would have imagined. And yeah, that was definitely one of the bigger surprises. And actually now the situation where we're handling what I just talked about, this audience shift into new customer campaigns, our new customer campaigns aren't really new customer campaigns anymore that way. So that's also something that we kind of saw coming, but probably not to the extent that we're seeing it now. So this is also a new situation that we're working on figuring out.
Yeah, exactly. So doomsday postponed, at least not canceled altogether. That's amazing.
Pretty much.
So behavioral data is, of course, something that has largely been going away. We, of course, still do have some data at our disposal. But how do you make sure that what you now have, you're able to make the most of?
Yeah, that's a very big point, actually. I mean, so far, before that, you had really, you basically had a lot of behavioral data available, and you didn't really have to tap into the extra data that you still have that much. Now the situation has changed. So what we're trying to do is, for the data that we still have consent from the users that we are allowed to use, to make the most of that. And that means using mechanisms like advanced matching wherever we can and are allowed to, and just providing our partners with the data that we're allowed to share with them, just to provide them with the extent of data that they need to make for their algorithms to make the best decisions for us and for their optimization to work as much in our favor as possible. It's significantly less, but that at the same time means what you have gets more and more important.
Yeah, exactly. Would you say that advanced matching is one of the key new things that you've been trying and testing for the past year, or is that something that you've been doing a lot already before?
We did use that before, or we were implementing that, but I think this change has now kicked it off into even using it more and trying to make more use of it. We've been starting to implement it, but not across all platforms, obviously, and it's becoming more and more important. And especially on, I mean, as I said before, about use cross-platform, we're not just talking about app environments where you can just rely on an identifier and say okay, the users are still matched on that identifier, I match them. But since we're cross-platform, things like email addresses, for instance, become much more important here. So that basically, we've basically intensified our efforts there.
Yeah, exactly. So with the lack of that intent data, what are, you mentioned email addresses, what are the types of data? What is the data that you currently kind of use the most or make the most of?
I can't actually say because it differs per platform. So we usually just talk to a partner and kind of find out what they need. I mean, you always kind of have to try to follow the principle of just supplying the data that is necessary, but not too much. So it's basically, it's a matter of looking at what each platform uses, what they can make the most of, and what data we have and what data we have consent to use. But I would say probably the email address is then the most important one. Yeah,
exactly. We've been hearing that from a lot of Smartly customers as well, and kind of building trust to the brand so that consumers feel comfortable giving that email address or sharing any of their personal data, of course, becomes more and more important. With that focus, we've also heard a lot that kind of a renewed interest to brand campaigns or more upper funnel campaigns or just mid funnel campaigns is something that a lot of advertisers are trying to figure out. Is that something that About You is also looking into?
Yeah, we always kind of did that. So it's not just started in the past year, but also there we have intensified our efforts that we're doing. So we're looking quite a lot at mid-funnel campaigns right now, kind of trying to get the users more in this exploration phase onto not really kind of moving, not really moving away from classic performance campaigns, but having this additional effort in the mid funnel and also partially in the upper funnel. So we've been doing that before, but we're definitely doing more there now, and trying to find out how to steer those campaigns most efficiently, especially with the behavioral data missing around that.
Exactly. So any learnings there? And what is the recipe for a successful mid-funnel campaign?
If I knew that, I probably wouldn't tell. No, but I mean, the key there is, I think, also, again, to look at the data that you still have and see how you can make the most of that. So data like, and as simple as that might seem, clicks, CTRs can be in a mid-funnel campaign a good factor. What we also do is we look at the actual website visits. So we don't really track those campaigns necessarily, or steer those campaigns necessarily on purchase data, but we mainly look at visits. You can, for instance, define a qualified visit of a user. So what makes a qualified visit? Is it a certain time on site? Is it a certain amount of pages visited? That kind of thing is a way to go there to kind of just see, like, how can I quantify user quality in that way. So yeah, that is the biggest thing I think that we're looking at. It's like, how can we find a metric, an on-site metric that you can kind of instantly get a result on?
Yeah, exactly. So would you say that you have new metrics or new KPIs that are introduced since iOS 14 came into play, or are you still looking at the same metrics that you were a year ago?
Yes and no. We are still looking at the same ones. I think we shifted focus in some cases a little bit. For instance, on app install, we shifted focus towards more the CPI that we still looked at before, but definitely wasn't our main focus point. So we had to shift focus onto that, obviously. And more like I want to say like instant behavioral data, like what does the user do on site when they first enter. So for app, that might be things like paying more attention to actually product views, like content views, to add to carts, looking into data like how many add to carts does a user do in the first 24 hours after the visit, and like how does that translate, or how can that potentially translate into user quality? It's more like these sort of mid-funnel events along the conversion funnel that we're looking at. So again, moving away from purchase a little bit more, and yeah, also then looking at this data like qualified visits on the page. To be fair, it really depends on the campaign type as well, right? You can't judge every campaign on these KPIs.
And that's so important. More and more advertisers are just running such an incredible variety of different campaigns on different platforms, at different markets, at different times. How do you keep track of it all? Like, can you have global universal metrics that you always look at, or do you really go to like a campaign specific granular level when you determine what is performing and what isn't?
I wouldn't say it's campaign specific, but it's definitely platform specific. I mean, you have to have a framework to kind of like see the whole thing. So we kind of have a dual approach there. We compare the platforms on sort of a wider set of KPIs and kind of see what works where, but there you don't have like one specific set of KPIs, for instance. Like, okay, so we'll always look at the ROAS, for instance, and whatever works well there is the best. So we also look at factors like new customer quotas. Where do we get the most new customers off? So it's a combination of things usually. But then when it gets to actually kind of like fine tuning, steering campaigns, then it's more a platform specific approach.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a dual system, or probably not even dual, multiple.
Exactly. You have to juggle a lot to keep all that rolling. So with all those different channels at play now, and to be fair, more and more channels coming all the time where consumers are engaging with brands, what in your mind are the most important ways for brands to kind of continue to deliver relevant and performing ads also in the future?
I think it's an interesting one because it's changing quite a lot. One thing that we see a lot is walled gardens and the walls getting higher. So I think a key factor is really understanding how a platform works that you use, how they use the data, also understanding if there's any overlaps between that platform and maybe another one that you're on. I think especially when you go in the DSP direction, that can be a very big factor. When you're on social, obviously, you might have an audience overlap, but not really an overlap on the platforms themselves. So really understanding that and how each network serves your ads and how that works. So I think really understanding how this whole how the whole system works, sort of, that helps. And then from that, you can go on and decide on, okay, so on the one hand, who has a very, very advanced advertising platform that is probably going to serve me best, but what audience can I get with that? What audience can I reach with that? So you have to ask yourselves those questions quite a lot, and then make sure you distribute your efforts across the best, the most reach on the basis of the best performing ad platforms, basically, and try not to have too much overlap there. Basically, that's the approach that we're trying to follow. To be fair, it's not super easy, also because it's changing quite a lot and has been in the past years. So you always have to kind of stay on top of the information there and reevaluate your approach all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So with that overlap, and especially audience overlap in walled gardens, do you ever see a benefit with that? Like, would you ever consider running campaigns where you show different type of content for the same audience in different platforms, given how different some of the walled gardens are and how differently people behave on those platforms?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, before iOS 14, we used to do that quite a lot because we could track it, right? Yeah. We have multi-touch attribution, super easy. Then you could track it, and then you could assign an attribution system on top of it, and that would tell you exactly the worth of each platform along the funnel, basically. That, to be fair, is getting a lot harder. I think there's still a value of doing that, targeting the same user with a different kind of ad across several platforms. But that being said, it's much harder to still track that. Yeah. So, or to at least, track the same user across several platforms. So, I don't really have an answer to that. I think it should still be done, but you have to be more careful about it because you have less data to actually analyze these user journeys. In some cases, you can't do that. One approach that you could, for instance, do is if you have a platform that you found out in the past that worked really well for more mid-funnel campaigns, focus on that for the mid-funnel activities, and focus on another platform where you know there's an audience overlap, but you have more lower funnel activities in that one, and then focus on those on that platform. That is one way of doing it, I think, but it's also probably not the best way. At the same time, it's I think it's we're in a situation where we have to die some kind of death, basically.
Exactly. So would you say it's a fair analysis to say that you have moved to a more channel-specific strategy or a platform-specific strategy in your advertising, rather than looking at the different platforms as a whole and optimizing across all of them? You're looking at them individually now as separate walled gardens.
We're doing both, and I think we've always done both. I don't think it was ever a good idea to just see everything as one thing, because you always had these differences between platforms, and you always could see, okay, this platform is really good for this user type and that platform is really good for that. So if we would have done that in the past, we would probably in the past only run on 2 advertising platforms, and that's it, right? To be perfectly fair. So we've always done that. But yeah, I think you need to look more at a platform-specific approach right now, because it's really worth understanding how they work. and also, how these walled gardens work, and maybe do you still have a way of measuring cross-platform there or not? And at the same time, kind of see how these individual systems fit into your overall strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, last question. I'm not going to ask you to reveal secrets and tell which of those platforms is currently working best for you, but let me just say that at Smartly, we have seen some interesting shifts in budget allocation between different social platforms over the past 6 or 12 months. Are you seeing the same, and do you have any predictions for the rest of 2022 on what are the rising platforms and what should advertisers be looking at right now?
We're not really seeing too much of a shift, I would say, but we're obviously exploring new platforms. So I think there it's more of a matter of where do the users go. I mean, everyone knows TikTok is on a big rise right now. So we're obviously looking into that and like seeing how we can make the best use of that. I think with this kind of approach, it's more of a matter of like, where do the users go and where do we find which audience? So depending on our targets there, on our goals, and to be perfectly fair, we don't have the same targets in every country. Obviously, we have countries that we recently launched last year. Those are going to have vastly different targets than our core markets, which is amongst others, Germany, obviously. So we also look at different approaches there. And yeah, it's there mainly, it's more a strategic matter, I would say, to see where do we find the users, where do we find which audience, and how can we use these platforms. So for instance, what I said before, when you see a platform that works really well for your lower funnel campaigns and you see another one that works well for your mid funnel campaigns, might as well like use both, but then focus your efforts on one and on the other with a different strategies that you have there. So I don't really understand it as a shift. I understand it more as an extension of what you've been doing before.
Yeah. Wow, that is such a good perspective to how approach social advertising and the space in this post iOS 14 world. Thank you, Caroline, for all the information you shared, and like I said, the perspective for the topic. And thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of the Outsmart Yourself series. You can always visit smartly.io/outsmart to register to the series and our following episodes. And we are really looking forward to seeing you on our next episode in 1 month's time. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you.